Today on MedTech TV, we're going to talk about the rise of the machines with 3D printers.
I'm Paula Rutledge.
I'm Reese White.
I'm Chris McLow.
And welcome to MedTech TV. So, Chris,
Yes.
we're going to talk about 3D printing,
Yes.
which has just come out of nowhere in the last couple of years to really make a huge impact on the medical device world.
Right. You know, it's so interesting. You think about it, just 5 to 10 years ago, it's almost like the first 3D printer was out. You saw, printing plastic dinosaurs and little toy trucks, and now it's made.
I remember that as a little girl. So you go to the turnpike stations and you'd print the little dinosaurs out, and I thought that was cool back when I was a kid.
I know, now people are printing entire things in their houses.
Right.
It's
in buildings.
Yeah, download things off the internet and just print it. It's amazing.
Right.
Even toys for kids these days.
Yeah.
It's like 3D printing for a 6-year-old. I mean, that's insane.
Even cement. But in the application of the technology, we've seen a great resurgence within the market, more specifically in the orthopedic space. On the short term, in the long term, I think we'll find some more really benefits to cellular-based 3D printing for regenerative medicine, which is a huge growth market right now. But I want to talk about one company in specific, Conformis. It's a patient-matched 3D printed. They do a pre-op scan of the patient's anatomy, and then you get your knee in a box. And advantageously, you cut down on cost because you don't lug in the trays, as Paula, you certainly know.
Right. Back in the day, you would bring in 8 or 10 trays for surgery, which was just really expensive. You opened something up and you had to reprocess. It was incredibly expensive.
Right.
And then I think the next step with that was companies like Otis Med, which was patient guides, patient-specific guides, not the implants itself.
Yeah.
And now we've come full circle to companies like Conformis.
Conformis, where you get your knee or your hip in a box. I know short term they're focusing on the knee side, but it's really fascinating how far 3D printing has come into the medical device space. In fact, Gartner says by 2019, 10% of people in the developed world will live with a 3D printed technology on or in their body.
Right. And not just orthopedics,
Yeah.
dental and prosthetics and other areas as well.
Yeah, and sensor technology as well. I think that'll be a fascinating play as we do remote patient monitoring and the like. And I think what's interesting, we're still on the early adopter phase of the technology as a whole. It's not that old of a technology in relation to the medical device space, and I think we've seen the greatest impact being in primarily hardware at this stage, spinal implants, additive manufacturing and 3D printed into orthopedic implants. And what's fascinating about, I think, the technology as a whole is some of these anatomically complex procedures, like an oncology case or a traumatology case, you can actually have some great clinical benefit in relation to a custom or a unique fit for some of the non-status quo procedures out there in the market. So I think it's something that's growing up, and we always say follow the money, right? Where is the private equity, where's the venture capital money flowing into? And I think we'll see more entrants between now and really the next 10, 15 years as we gain mass market adoption, find creative solutions for some of these companies to develop newer technologies.
And it's, I think, changing how we're finding folks to come into this marketplace. In the past, I look at, for instance, the CEO of Metacrea came out of, I believe, HP, one of the printing companies. So it's really changing even how companies are finding the talent to be able to staff their companies. And I wish you were talking about recently that some of the scopes for the positions have really started to expand based on some of the needs of 3D printing.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point. I handle a lot of our R&D, manufacturing, any of these engineering positions which are trying to adopt this types of new technology into the market. And what's interesting is the medical device experience becomes less important, and the manufacturing experience, the exposure to new technology becomes paramount. Some of the interesting things to remember, I think, so Amazon has warehouses now that are entirely run for the most part, they'll have robot-only zones where no people can enter as it's being run completely automated through a robotic system. You're seeing that now in the automotive industry as well. It's something that's been coming on and more to the forefront. And more medical device companies are wondering, how can we see this adoption in other industries and bring it into our own? Not just with robotics or 3D printing, but what new technologies exist. IBM Watson is doing it for the supply chain.
Right.
Now manufacturing is looking to do the exact same thing, which is, I mean, it's exciting. It gives folks who are not necessarily in the device community now, they're going to have that entryway as long as they have that exposure to those types of new technologies. And 3D printing is probably the biggest buzzword that's on the market right now.
Yeah.
Right, and Conformis has been in the news quite a bit lately.
Right.
I know they got a new CEO less than a year ago. I think has really made some real inroads.
Right.
What do you think has been driving their their success in the last little bit?
Really, yeah. I think a lot of it is early adoption. I think we're going to start seeing some of the technologies, and there's always that technology adoption curve. You get the early adopters, and then you spread it to the mass market. A lot of, I think, the early success has been built upon academic institutions to be able to be thought leaders within the market to try new technology. And I think the second is, as we look at the episode of care, which is now a focal point, not just from an efficacy standpoint and a safety standpoint and really promoting clinical outcomes. There's a very, and I'll speak specifically to spine and orthopedics, there's a very, very nuanced focus on how do we retain the margins from a corporate perspective, but also how do we save the hospital system money. From admission to a very short time after they leave the hospital, it's really being structured or focused on to be able to help the macroeconomic bubble of healthcare reduce cost and have the payers, I think, be able to cover an element of not overcharging from a healthcare perspective by focusing on clinical outcomes. So I think it's another play in regards to that.
Yeah, and cost-cutting measures are king in hospitals right now. Things that never would have gone through a VAC committee years ago are going through it now. It's paramount. So any place that someone can look to reduce that cost is brilliant.
And even just, you think about patients are so much more involved in their healthcare these days that having something that is specific to you, that's 3D printed for you, has just got to make a sense from a cost-cutting standpoint, because you think about just the storage alone to have tens and sometimes hundreds of trays for a particular type of procedure is inefficient and requires a whole lot more personnel. So the clinical benefits of 3D printing.
Right. So anatomically, you do pre-op CT and you get your knee or your hip in a box. Anatomically, in theory, should be more custom, right? And that's really the mantra as we have companies going more B2C, and we were talking about how we're finding talent on the R&D side, move from aerospace and printing into a ISO 1345 regulated medical device company because of the skill set. The same thing we're seeing with branding or consumer-based items having a draw to come into the medical device space because there's a big focus on intelligent consumers from a medical device perspective. So if I can get a custom knee and it's anatomically perfect for me, why wouldn't I want that over something off the shelf?
Right, and we had that kind of the gap where we had gender-specific implants for a while, and I think those are probably going the way of patient-specific implants, which seem to make a whole lot more sense, and the manufacturability have become so much more reproducible. So I think that makes a huge difference in where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see new entrants into the market. There's a small Canadian company called BodyCad. It's led by some bright folks who've got a lot of experience in the
There's a lot coming out of Canada these days.
Yeah, a lot of Canada. And
Israel. And Israel, yeah.
Israel and Canada,
Israel.
So it just seems like, particularly Toronto and some Montreal, there's just some incredible innovations on that front there. So
Most certainly. And I think what's interesting is as we find the new entrants, sometimes it is easier to go second. I mean, sometimes you got someone who's figured out all the potholes, and then as the second to market, sometimes I'll just avoid those, and maybe we'll be a little bit more seamless. And competition is always healthy.
what about the big companies? Are they starting to work in this patient-specific area as well?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, you've got DePuy Synthes, they've got the True Match systems, and not just in hips and knees again, but into trauma, into CMF, all areas of the facets. They're looking at ways they can lean out or efficientize the operational process, which in lieu of just standard CAD comes in 3D printing, so we can retain the margins, but also how do we get better patient outcomes? How do we lower the readmission rates, and how do we save the entire or reduce the entire healthcare burden of the market.
Right.
So I think overall we'll see some more entrants. The big guys, they're always looking for ways to innovate, whether it's through acquisition or organically. Oftentimes we've seen so much consolidation in the market that it has been through acquisition. But what's nice is when you have all those resources, you can always have or try to have some more foresight out there in the space.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see one of the bigger companies start scooping up some of these folks who are bringing the new innovative technology onto market. That's really, I think, within the medical device world, we're so used to seeing the acquisitions of the small, nuanced companies.
For big multiples, too.
Big,
big multiples. Yeah.
Of course, we've got all the acquisitions of the big companies these days as well, with Zimmer Biomet, Medtronic, Avidian. There seems like there's just been a whole lot of movement in the investment community, which is probably a good thing. But I guess it's just my heart. I still like the small startups. I still like the companies where you can have an executive meeting in a 16-passenger van, where every week is a month, and the velocity of innovation is so huge. And both the startups and some of these incubator companies within the larger, and certainly in academia as well, which is why we enjoy traveling so much to these conferences to see some of this amazing innovation that's coming out of sometimes really, really young folks.
Right.
So something I used to be able to relate to, not so much anymore.
Vertera Spine, recent acquisition with NuVasive, 3D printed technology in PEEK, not titanium, right? The cage rage with titanium has made an incredible resurgence with additive manufacturing and 3D printing, but Vertera, a relatively small company, relatively unknown to most in the space unless you go to one of the major congresses like ISAS or NAS or AANS. Just got acquired. And I think that's the proof of concept that these larger companies are looking for M&A activity and will pay a nice multiple, even though it was an undisclosed amount, pay a nice multiple for innovation.
Do you think that candidates now are gravitating more to the smaller startup companies than they are some of the bigs at this point?
I think it depends. What I think candidates are going to be looking for is where can we find some place that is forward thinking? Where can we find some place that is bringing new technology to the forefront? Because people want to work with thought leaders. People want to be the thought leader. They want to drive. They don't necessarily want to follow. They want to be the person that is the paradigm shift. So I think so many small companies have the opportunity to do something new or to try something different. And so when you have these Verteras and we have Conformis and BodyCad out there in the market trying something different, I think that really speaks to a lot of folks who are interested in working for a company that's paving the way, not just maintaining the status quo.
Yeah, there's certainly advantages and disadvantages to both.
Absolutely.
So, any summary of where 3D printing is headed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll still find unique ways, and always creative minds are the thought leaders, the driving forces behind it. Even think outside of our industry and Uber, right? No one thought that was going to happen, at least not this soon. And I think there's always new ways to develop, especially with new ways of manufacturing, not only in the hardware space, but I think we'll see is very interesting innovation long term at this cellular level with 3D printing, like regenerative medicine, laying cells on top of each other at a very, very micro level to potentially regenerate organs, which I know is certainly a concept that's been thought out. But I think, and I'm optimistic that at some point in life we'll make it a reality.
Sounds like a plan. So if technology is your thing, then be sure to tune in next week when we talk about some new robotic companies that are starting even right now. Thanks for joining us this week on MedTech TV.